Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you that you've never told anyone about? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I went on a school trip to London when I was 13, and on our first night, I decided to stay in as I was exhausted from jet lag. My two friends leave the hotel room to go explore, and I fall asleep. An hour or so later, I wake up to hear what I thought was my friends quietly returning to the room. I lay there pretending to be asleep, but also watching someone stuff clothes under the door to keep the door semi-open, so there is light in the otherwise pitch-black room. At some point, I realized this is not my friends. This is some dude clearly breaking into the hotel room. I lay there super still for what seemed like forever, and as he came over to my side of the bed, I shot up quickly and yelled, "What the fuck are you doing?" Motherfucker tore out of that room so fast. I ran after him, furious, only realizing as I stood in the hall that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to follow him. 15 years later, I had a run-in with my college campus artist. He was stalking me in my early morning as I left my boyfriend's place. However, I ended up surprising him as he turned a corner, and unbeknownst to him, I had doubled back, having forgot something. As I came around the corner, I ran right into him, and he grabbed me, but was clearly off balance. My reaction was to push him with my body and yell, "What the fuck are you doing?" This surprised him, and it gave me enough of an advantage to get away. Clearly, "What the are you doing?" is my trigger response. When I was around 12, I was home alone and the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw no one, but the bell kept ringing every minute or so for almost 10 minutes straight. When it finally stopped, I checked again, and there was a single Polaroid photo on the doormat of my front door, taken from the outside at night. I never told my parents. I just threw it in the trash and tried to forget it. When I was 19 or 20 in college, I used to wander around New York City when I was bored and had no one to hang out with. I went to Forever 21 right before they closed, and on my way out, I ran into this tall Italian dude. I said sorry, and he immediately tried to kiss me. I honestly have no idea why I ended up continuing to hang out with this man. I don't remember how things played out, but he ended up holding me hostage for the entire night, and I was absolutely terrified. He said he would follow me wherever I went, and kept reminding me he was so big and I was too small to fight with him. He said it jokingly, but still, I felt so defeated and just went along with him. He wouldn't let go of my hand for even a second. We went to his apartment building, and I asked him if we could go to the rooftop for fresh air instead of straight to his apartment, and he agreed. We went up there for a bit, and he said he was going to his apartment to get wine. I told him I'd wait. There were two dudes smoking weed on the rooftop, and I ran over to them and begged for them to get me out of there. They helped me leave the building, and I never saw that guy again. I was pretty sure I was going to be assaulted that night. This one isn't creepy, just unexplainable. My uncle passed a couple of years ago. I called and talked to my grandma on my way home from work one night a few days after he passed. My uncle was her son, and I wanted to check in to see how she was holding up. She mentioned that she was trying to cancel his cell phone plan, but because she didn't have his death certificate yet, they were giving her a hard time. I was a little sad that she was going to cancel his phone because he had a personalized voicemail, and it was the only thing I had of his voice, or so I thought. I went through my old voicemails, and I found an old one that he left me almost a year previous to the date he passed. Apparently, I answered the phone, but it glitched, and the voicemail still saved. And you can hear us both talking to each other. One of his hospice nurses walked in as I answered, and he asked if he could call back, and we both said, "I love you," to each other. So I have an unexplained voicemail of us both saying "I love you." This voicemail was received almost 4 years ago, and he passed almost 3 years ago. I also have an iPhone, so I have no idea how it happened. I was about 4, and my mom and I were at the neighbor's house. I was downstairs with the 4 kids, who ranged from 8 to 16. Those kids lived with their grandparents and were badly mistreated. Lots of abuse and neglect going on. One of them said something about my parents spanking me, and I said they never had. All 4 of them jumped on me, pinned me to the floor, and started spanking me. I remember the feel of the cold cement floor, the oldest boy holding my feet, and the 2 middle boys pushing their knees into my back to hold me down. My next memory is sitting on the oldest boy's lap and crying. They were all trying to quiet me, and they looked terrified. They kept saying, "You can't tell. We'll get in so much trouble." Looking back, I think I must have passed out because they were suffocating me. Still, I never did tell anyone about it. I had a vivid dream that my sister died. She was at a party with her friends and I was at home. Everything was normal. I went to bed and then had this very vivid dream that my sister was missing. We, my parents and I, went to our back field and started searching there. I found one of her earring at the edge of this wooded area and continued into the forest, which slowly became denser and then transformed into a wooden shelter used for like goats or sheep. In the shelter was my sister, curled up in the fetal position, dead. I ran over to her and picked her up and shook her, trying to do anything to bring her back. I remember holding her cold body and how it had set into rigor mortis, and there were like this waxy feeling to her skin. It was awful. I woke up sobbing and called my sister a bunch before texting was included in the plan, and she didn't answer. I made my mom call her, which she only agreed to do because of how upset I was, and my sister actually came home early the next morning. I told her about my dream, and she told me that while she was drinking with her friends, she had been hit in the back of her head during whatever they had been playing by the edge of the woods, and while everyone else had run off to continue playing, she had actually curled up on the ground because she was so dizzy from being hit. She said she was fading in and out of consciousness, but wasn't sure if it was the alcohol, the hit to the head, or a combination of the two. She had also lost one of her earrings that night. I still get upset thinking about holding my sister's body, even though it was technically just a dream, and whenever I dream of anything remotely having to do with my sister, I call her up right away, just in case. I was followed as a 14-year-old while running by a man who wasn't wearing pants. He had gotten well ahead of me and pulled into a street facing the street I was running on. He had gotten out of his car and just stood there with no pants on, trying to pull down his polo shirt. I was terrified and ran to the park close by where my coach and team were. Then, I needed to leave earlier due to a doctor's appointment and had to go back to the high school. He followed me again, and when I got onto the campus, I called 911 from inside the locker room. This was before cell phones, by the way. Mine is probably not that good. When I was a kid, I had a T-Rex action figure from the first Jurassic Park movie. It was meant to be played in conjunction with the Raptor toy, so a hunk of flesh on its side could be removed to expose the ribs, and you could pretend there was some damage occurring in the fight. I had stayed up late watching a baseball game or some sport with my father and fell asleep on the couch holding the T-Rex. When it was over, he scooped me up, toy and all, and threw me over his shoulder to drop me in bed. The T-Rex hit him in the back, and I was awake anyway, so he put me down to walk the rest of the way. But it was also the first time he got a look at the toy, so he asked to look closer. He took it from me, saw the hunk of flesh you could remove. I explained it, he popped it out, and it fell before he could hold it. In this empty hallway, it hit the ground, bounced, and vanished. It was gone. There was nothing there except a closet door. We looked around. He told me it had to be somewhere, and that it would turn up, but I had to go to bed. And then I just didn't show up again. That is, until around 2010. I was helping him to open a room So we were removing the drywall from that hallway, and inside the wall was a weird, fleshy plastic thing that had us confused until we realized what it was. In the wall was the stupid toy piece from a T-Rex toy long since discarded.
So this is a little bit different than your story, but things disappearing have happened to me, but I don't know why I'm even telling, but it has to do with my dad. So it was Christmas morning. I'd gotten a G.I. Joe Blackbird jet. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember what that is, but it looked like a stealth bomber. It was totally awesome. It had a little plane on top. Anyway, I'm sitting there, and my father's trying to fidget with the packaging, and he had a fork in his hand. And I remember saying to myself, I'm like, he's going to hit me with that fork. And my father was not a violent man, right? But he was frustrated with this packaging opening, and the fork flew out of his hand like 10 seconds later and hit me. How do I explain that? It was like Premonition, and it happened. I don't know. Anyway, I'm glad you find the T-Rex flesh.
It was 2 a.m. and the folks were dead asleep. My room was on the other side of the house, so I may as well have been. There was a pretty bad storm outside, and I was just on my PC playing Eve. The landline phone starts ringing. Now, this isn't uncommon during a storm for it to ring once or twice at random, I guess due to lightning hitting close to the vicinity of phone lines. But this time it keeps ringing. Eventually, I pick it up and ask who's calling. The second I do, I feel something standing behind me. Not just a, hey, is something there. It's the kind of overbearing presence that freezes you in place and keeps you from turning around to see it. There's a voice on the phone, but it sounds like trying to listen to somebody screaming underwater. This goes on for about 5 minutes. Then the phone cuts out, and whatever I felt behind me disappears immediately. The creepier thing with the phone is it was a set of wireless handhelds, and there was one in my folks' room as well. For some reason, they never heard it. That house was one of 3 fairly isolated lots on a mountain in a very rural part of Tennessee. That's one of a load of creepy things that happened to me living there. When I was like 10, my mom ran across town to pick up my siblings from the babysitter. I had just gotten home off the school bus and was home alone. Our house phone rang, and it was a man. It sounded like a voice I knew but couldn't quite place it. Because I thought it was someone I knew, when they asked where my mom was, I said she'd be back in a few minutes. They began to tell me how pretty I was, and then asked me if I'd like them to do something super sexually explicit. I hung up and made sure every door was locked. I called my mom's cell phone and told her someone called the house and said something really, really bad, but never got the courage to tell her what they said. She checked the caller ID, and it was blocked, of course. I've never told anyone what they said. My grandma died when I was 3. We were super close. After her death, I started being scared of our bathroom. At the time, my mom and I were living at my grandparents' house. I'd sometimes pee my pants, even though I had been toilet trained for a long time. If I did get the courage to go into the bathroom, I'd leave the light on after I went and sped out of there. It was coming up on Christmas, which was my grandma's favorite holiday. She'd decorate the house with so much stuff in a specific way. My mom tried to decorate as closely to how my grandma did. It was clear she and my grandpa didn't have the heart for it. Right after finishing the tree, I ran into the living room from the bathroom, and they told me I needed to turn the light off. I apparently told them I couldn't because Grandma was in there and she needed me to keep the light on for her so she could see. And she was really mad at them for how bad they decorated the tree. Then the tree fell over. They immediately redecorated the tree to Grandma's standards. When I was 17, my girlfriend and I came back to my dad's house after we were at an amusement park for the day. My parents weren't home, so we laid on the couch for a bit to rest. After a while, we tried to get frisky until we both heard a loud, stern voice yell, "Hey!" Fearing we just got caught red-handed by my father, I got up to address him. However, no one was home. I distinctly remember exactly when the voice came from in the house, too. In the adjacent living room, heading up toward the stairs. No TVs were on, computer was off, no music was playing, and no windows open. Just one loud, "Hey!" It had the tone of an angry dad catching his kids doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. I knew she heard it too, because she looked horrified and fell silent for a while. When I was around 16 or so, I had a boyfriend who lived just up the road from me. One night, he walked to my house and we were talking out back at the end of the driveway. When we went to go inside, I walked to the door first, and he was a little behind me. I turned to say something to him, and he was staring past me pale. He said, "Whoa, what the hell?" I asked him what it was, and he said, "There was just an old man with a beard standing right behind you." I started panicking, because I was on the top step of our back porch when it happened. Each step was only like 10 inches wide, so there was absolutely no room for anyone to be standing behind me. I was driving to a party in the woods, like a big camp-out bash party with speakers. I'm with a few people in my car driving to the location, which is about 30 minutes up a logging road, in the full dark, in an already remote location. At some point, we all start feeling like we missed a turnoff because we had been driving for a while, but none of us had seen any markers, but decided to keep going for another 10 minutes or so, just to be sure. Suddenly, in the woods to our right, this big single light goes on. It looked like a motorcycle headlight, about 10 to 15 meters away. At first, I thought it was someone in the woods with a big flashlight, but this thing paced my car for at least 5 minutes before it just disappeared. We all saw it, and none of us could figure out what it was. There are absolutely no other roads in that area. Eventually, we turned back and found the party, but we were all creeped out. I was in a public hotel room with my older sister in the Gold Coast on holiday, and Neil Young's song "Old Man" was playing in the toilets. My sister was in this cubicle next to me, and we were discussing how the song reminds us of how when we were little, we were on some sort of farm with our parents. It was all dirt and nighttime, and we saw a human skeleton hand coming out of the dirt. We both agreed and said that song reminded us of this very distinct memory. Both Mom and Dad have no recollection of this. We would say to them, "How can you forget? There was a human skeleton hand." Nope. They never remember even being on this farm and saw no bones in the dirt. Nothing at all. About 26 years ago, my dad had died from complications from an organ transplant. He made it through surgery, but never ended up making it out of the hospital. Anyways, he was in the hospital for about 3 months. My mom and myself stayed with him and visited him 10 to 12 hours a day. I was about 24 at the time, and thankfully had a super good boss back then that let me go and stay with him and my mom. The hospital was about 5 hours from home. Anyways, the doctor told us he was getting better one time, so I went home and went back to work. Well, my dad ended up taking a turn for the worse, so I went back to the hospital with my mom. About 2 weeks later, he passed away. So I finally went back to work about 2 weeks after that. Back then, I was apprenticing as a welder, so I was on a job with my helper, and I was prepping pipe in the back of my truck, grinding away, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I stopped grinding and flipped my welding helmet up and turned around. Nobody there. Helper was about 25 to 30 feet away, digging in a ditch. Went back to work grinding away, when I get a hand on my shoulder again. But this time the hand squeezed my shoulder hard enough to make me turn around before I lifted my lid. Empty field all around except the ditch where my helper was working. Nobody else around. I screamed loud enough to my helper, asking what he wanted, because my diesel welder was running. The helper looked up at me and said he never came over to me. There's zero chance that could have been covered that much space in the time I turned around. So I think maybe it was a sign from my dad. I don't know. But I know what I felt that day. One of my mom's friends got pregnant when she was 16. Her son was about 4 years younger than me. They had younger kids too. I would babysit them. Once I made 16, she would routinely go on about, "When I was your age and had kids, you're behind the curve." Like it was a hilarious routine. When I was 17, her husband dropped by unannounced at our house and said he hurt his back. asked my folks if I could come over and help around the yard for the afternoon. We get to their place. Kids are at his parents'. The yard has a few downed limbs, not much. Husband announces after 10 minutes he needs to go get his kids. He'll be gone about 60 to 90 minutes. He's not out of the driveway, and she's at the back door calling me inside for a break. She's standing there with a cup of water, but she's wearing a white t-shirt with no bra and bikini bottom. Never seen her do anything like this before. I'm standing there drinking water, avoiding eye contact, while she keeps bumping my arm accidentally with her tits. I finish as she chats me up, keeps touching me and laughing at everything I say, asks if I've had sex before, asks if I want to have sex now, or if I want a BJ. I don't even answer, just walk outside, get the ladder I was using for some broken but not fallen branches, and climb onto the roof. Never told my folks because I assumed I was at fault in some way. Never went around that couple again. I was 21, alone, and had booked a taxi to take me to a family party. It showed up about an hour early. I was ready anyway, so I thought I would just go and help set up. I got in the cab, and straight away he's asking where I'm going and why. Then switching to telling me about other girls he had picked up that week. I noticed he didn't look anything like the photo on his badge. He said he had cut and dyed his hair since the ID photo was taken. As I was already in a car with him, halfway through the journey, I chose just to believe him, but I was skeptical. He started telling me you make more money from airport runs. Looking back, I think he was trying to sound legit as a driver. And he went on about picking up air stewardesses and having threesomes with them before they flew back out the next day. This taxi driver talked at 1,000,000 miles an hour and drove even faster. So much so we arrived at the venue before it even opened. No one else was around, not even employees, we were so early. The taxi driver said he'd wait with me. We were sitting in an empty car park outside an empty bar. He offered me a cigarette and I accepted. This seemed to make him think we were now best friends. He was definitely giving off creepy vibes, but I didn't know how to get away from him. He told me how hard it would be getting a taxi to come take me home later, as it was a Saturday night and they get busy late on. He offered to give me his number so I could ring him to come back and get me at the end of the party. And because it was me, he would definitely take this job next. Then he took my phone out of my hand and punched his number in. Then rang his phone to check he put the numbers in right, but that meant he now had my number. He went on to tell me how he would wrap his dog chains around his fist and punch it in the face to toughen it up. I was so relieved when my relatives started to arrive with venue staff. He eventually left, reminding me to phone him later. At the end of the party, I stepped outside to call a cab, only to see one sitting there, obviously the same guy. I don't know if it was fear of upsetting him or because I had had a drink by then, but I got in. He drove me home, still talking shite. We got to my street, and he more or less invited himself in. I had to make several excuses to get him to take no for an answer. When I eventually got out of the vehicle, I ran in and bolted the door, made sure all the windows and blinds were closed, and just sat in the dark for a bit, hoping he didn't see which door I went in. I was so relieved to be rid of him. Until he rang me at 4 a.m. several months later to tell me he was on my street. This happened a few more times until I eventually blocked him. I think he got the hint, but I still feel uneasy about ever calling a taxi. I haven't told anyone about this because I know people will perceive me as crazy. Back in 2013, I used to see this black hooded figure standing near my bed during early morning hours, about 5 to 7 a.m. usually. At first, it would disappear within 5 seconds of my waking up. Then, gradually, it would stand closer and closer every time I saw it. After about 2 months, this figure started communicating with me. It would repeatedly tell me not to worship the Jewish God. I didn't know what it meant by that at the time. I also started seeing this creature when I was in college. It would harass me in ways that I don't want to go into. After months of frustration, I had a vivid dream where I was standing behind this guy dressed in a white robe. Right across from us was this black hooded figure. The guy in the white robe asked me to tell this black hooded figure to go away in his name. He asked me to repeat the phrase. I did, and the black figure went away. I felt like this dream came from God, because he saw how frustrated I was getting after being harassed by this creature for months. I decided to do what was shown in my dream. Next time this black creature appeared, I uttered the same phrase that was dictated to me in the dream. It made a growling noise and disappeared. After doing this a couple of times over the next couple of days, this creature stopped appearing and my life returned to normalcy. I haven't seen this creature since 2014. I was driving to work when I saw a thick cloud of dust crossing the highway just ahead of me. I looked left and saw 4 locomotive cars flying sideways off the tracks and crashing into an empty field. I jumped out of my car and was the first person on the scene. It looked like walking through a sci-fi movie set. Random steel pieces stuck on the ground at odd angles. Then I came across the horn of the train and realized I was looking at the undercarriage. There was total silence. So much so, in fact, that the next person to arrive asked me, "How many days ago did this happen?" Then I could see the diesel fuel rushing from the punctured tanks and forming a small lake. I left as the fire department arrived. There was nothing they could do to save the 3 crew members. It was later determined that the train was not properly weighted. Instead of having 9 engines, it only had 4, and the brakes were bad on one of those. Physics did the rest after the train started down a steep mountain grade. The cleanup at the site took weeks. Each day more train parts would be removed. Finally, the site was empty. I was 3 blocks away when I saw a tornado of fire going thousands of feet in the sky from the middle of that field. It turns out that the accident happened on top of a high-pressure JP4 pipeline. A brake shoe from the locomotive had embedded itself in the pipeline, which was buried at least 6 feet deep. A bulldozer was scrapping the lot to remove contaminated soil. Eventually, he reached the brake shoe, which punctured the pipeline. Homeowners, for nearly a block away, thought they heard it raining. It was JP4 under about 250 psi of pressure. The company running the pipeline noticed the pressure drop, but manually restarted their pumps nearly a dozen times. When the fuel ignited, over a dozen homes were lost, and several people were killed. I grew up in a middle-class town in the countryside. One day, age 15, I was at a bus stop, short distance from my house on a main busy road, in my school uniform. A car pulls over on the opposite side of the road. A man winds down the window and beckons me over to his hand. I ignore him. He swings his car across the road and into the bus stop next to me. He throws open the door and says, "How much?" I say, "What?" And he replies, "How much for sex?" and says, "Get in." At that moment, my nan comes around the corner in her car and sees me in the bus stop and stops to say hello. I go to her car and get in, and this man drives away. I was then surprised when I told my mom and she reported it to the police. I just thought it was funny. It's only in later life that I feel horribly anxious to think about what could have happened if my nan had not happened to drive by at that exact moment. Shudders. Almost 20 years ago, when I was in college, I went grocery shopping at a Safeway. I walked into the store and immediately noticed a creepy guy staring at me. I didn't think much of it because he was standing in the checkout line and I figured he would leave the store. So I go about my grocery shopping in the crowded store. As I was shopping, he walked by me quickly and brushed up against me and apologized as if it was an accident. I gave him a weird look and continued my shopping. I went to a different aisle where the tea was, and I was spending a few minutes looking at the tea selection when all of a sudden, I felt like there was someone behind me. I turned around to see the same man's face inches away from my butt. He was crouched down, and he threw his wallet down real quickly, and then tried to tell me that he dropped his wallet. It was clear at this point the guy was a major creep. I should have said something to someone.